Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea with TPS, an informal conversation with thought leaders in India and abroad. Today, our distinguished guest is Ambassador R. Vishwanathan. His passions are two. One is golf, which started long ago, and now it is Latin America. He has had a variety of postings: Lisbon, Karachi, Port Louis, Tripoli, and New York, where we work together. But New York seemed to have caused this transformation from an internationalist to a Latin Americanist because he went off as consul general to Sao Paulo, then ambassador to Venezuela, and finally ambassador to Argentina from 2007 to 2012. In between, he also looked after the Latin America desk in the Ministry of External Affairs. Latin America was not getting much attention in the ministry. I think it's Mr. Vishwanathan who changed all that, the history of Latin American relations with the United States. And he continues to take an interest in Latin American countries and the resident expert of the ministry even today when it comes to Latin America. It's maybe the distance that separated India and Latin America, but there is a certain amount of mystic relationship between many Latin American countries and India, which I have not been able to understand very well. They have gurus all over the place. There is Indian cuisine. So, in spite of the distance and absence of any major Indian communities in these countries, there has been a kind of relationship which has existed. And now trade has increased, etc. And in this, Cuba has been a major factor because right from 1962, when the non-aligned movement was established, Cuba became a significant leader of the non-aligned world. Of course, Cuba was on the left extreme of the non-aligned movement, and we had Singapore on the right extreme. So this shows that any system can coexist in the non-aligned world. But Mr. Castro played a role which is much more significant than the size of his country or the importance of the country in the non-aligned movement itself. And in spite of their problems with the United States, Cuba had maintained some kind of, what shall we say, not prosperity, but a sense of security and a sense of prosperity in Cuba. I have been there many, many times. But now that seems to be crumbling. Fidel Castro is gone. His brother Raul Castro has also handed over power. And now we have a Cuba without Castro. And we have been seeing some signs of disturbance problems. Some people called it the end of communism in Cuba. So what is your assessment of the present situation, Rich?
Sir, Cuba was an iconic, an emblematic revolution, and not only for the country, for the region, but for the world. It captured the imagination of the people around the world. Firstly, there was a small band of guerrilla fighters with the least resources managed to beat the Batista regime and take over his large army. And then after coming to power, there were so many conspiracies, attacks, and bullying by United States. They survived that. They flourished. And so this has given an added, it has enhanced the image of Cuba as a little guy who stood up to the bully and survived.
But that is basically because of the Soviet Union, wasn't it? Soviet subsidy.
Yes. So that is why it has taken on a larger role. So it is a kind of inspiration for revolutionaries in Latin America and around the world. But now the revolution has run its course. Now they have very little money. Their patron, earlier Soviet Union, gone. Then Venezuela, which supplied free oil and gave a lot of money. Chavez, that's also very limited now. Latest is a shipment of some medicines and supplies from Mexico from fellow travelers.
Did China step in when the Soviet Union collapsed?
No. China have a little investment and some trade, But they are careful. They find it's not worthwhile for them to support them ideologically or go with too much of investment. In fact, they have put more money in the rightist governments, like Brazil. Its ideology, as in, they're very careful and pragmatic. But now the Cuban Revolution has run its course. Now uh, people cannot eat revolution. People need bread and people need medicines. Although they have produced so many doctors and sent many, over 10,000 around the world. But there is shortage of medicines, and this COVID has hit them. Although they have developed their own indigenous COVID vaccines, but they have not been able to commercialize it yet. And there are queues, there are shortages of items, and so people are sort of fed up. Whereas the earlier generation, they said, okay, it is only the first 100 years of the revolution are difficult. Thereafter, it will be paradise. so they were fatalistic. But the new generation, the internet generation, they don't have the patience. They said, why should we suffer? And they don't have this background of revolution and Fidel Castro. So they look for bread, they look for water, they look for electricity, they look for petrol and diesel.
Internet.
Everything is in shortage. So they are now, they have risen in revolt. But the Cuban Communist Party, they are at a crossroads. There is a section of the party which wants them to follow the model of China and Vietnam. That is, keep politics under control, but open up the economy, let people make money, let there be some rich people. But this is where this is one faction. But the other faction, the hardliners, they don't want to give up. I think that's not a very wise idea, because here you have this clear case of China and Vietnam, where they allowed people to make money, and there's entrepreneurship, and there are millionaires and billionaires. At the same time, party has effective control of the country. But the old Cubans, they don't want to give up. That is the main problem. But they have to give up. There is no other way. It's just a matter of time.
But the American attitude towards Cuba is determined by the Cuban immigrants in Florida, Miami, etc. Is that true? And that is why they still have an interest in keeping Cuba under control, because these people, the immigrants, put a lot of pressure on the American administration to be tough with Cuba. And that is why even after Barack Obama had given all those concessions, because they're all withdrawn by Trump.
Sir, as you know, the State Department has no policy for Cuba or Israel. They have been outsourced. So the Cuban emigres run the policy for Cuba, and the Jewish community runs the policy for Israel. This is a clear one. And anyway, the
Israeli connection is much stronger and much bigger.
Yes. And those guys, they want their properties back, and they are very anti-Castro, and they want to take revenge. But they are important in American politics because of the vote bank, and that's a crucial one.
1 million people, right?
Yeah, but in American politics, the way the system works, that is crucial.
Yeah, particularly Florida.
Yes.
Florida is a crucial state.
And it also has not only the Cubans.
Barack Obama break that? How did he, in 2014, when he declared the change of Cuban policy? Wasn't there much resistance from the Cuban Americans?
Yes, of course. He went over their head. But now it has gone even more complicated, because the Cubans have been joined by the Venezuelan immigrants. Because Venezuela has become an authoritarian dictatorship, and there are a lot of refugees. So the Latin American community, the Latinos in Florida and in United States, they also sort of see that this whole Cuban revolution is gone, and why is there authoritarianism? Because that is the only country which is not a democracy. is an exception. Whereas in the last century, more than most of the countries were under dictatorship. Now, in the 21st century, the region has been liberated from military dictatorship starting from 1980s, and Cuba is the only exception. So it is anachronistic, and so people feel that it has to go.
No, but whenever I've been to Cuba, you get a sense of a happy people because the buildings are crumbling, you can see, but the night clubs are full and beaches are full of people, and there is a sense of well-being in Cuba. I could see. I'm talking about 79, 80 when Cuba was chairman of the non-aligned movement. And has that changed the atmosphere, or they are still very happy-go-lucky people?
So that is the older generation. But the new generation is impatient. They have no tolerance for this. And anyway, the problems have become much worse. And they don't have that spirit of sacrifice or revolutionary fervor. No, they just want bread, cars. They want what other people in the world have. And
So
the
they want to
regime is not.
liberate themselves and join up with the United States and try to develop the country. Is that their strategy?
Uh, no, then not so much about United States. United States is used by the Cuban government, saying that here is the big enemy, big bully. They are using it politically, but the basic problem is internal. They have to open up. They have to, because the economy is managed very badly, very poorly by the bureaucrats in the old Soviet style. There is so much of queues and shortages and inefficiency. Cuba at one time was a great one of the exporters of agro products and sugar and so on. But today they depend on imports because it has been neglected, and there's virtually no industry, and the fishing is very less, and so they need. It's basically they need internal reforms.
Well, will these protests prompt that, you think?
Yes, of course. There is no other way. No other way, because the government has to open up the economy. The government has to allow people to make money, and there is no other way. So it's just a matter of time.
Well, India and Cuba have had this, I mentioned it, kind of close relationship. Is there any substance in it in terms of trade or assistance? I think we sent them some paddy or rice soon after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But there is still a sense of comradeship, not only with the communists in India, but also generally the intellectuals. How do you explain that?
Well, our relationship is rather romantic.
Right.
Every prime minister and leader, including Rahul Gandhi, had made pilgrimages to Cuba to honor them and to say pay our respect to them. But that is the whole thing. But India has been helping them. It has given a line of credit and so on. But trade is very little, and there's no other substance. And they use a lot of high-tech scholarships from India. And there are some Cuban trainers for our athletes and so on. But it is limited.
How about health? They seem to have, different, very, very special medicines for certain diseases and so on. So whenever there is something happens in India, they talk about Cuban medicine. Is it now outdated?
There are some niche areas in which the Cubans have made breakthrough. For example, in biotechnology, there are certain areas where they have developed new molecules, new technology, but they were not able to take it to the commercial level. That's why they formed a joint venture with the Biocon, with Kiran Mazumdar. And they have so the Biocon has a joint venture with Cuba. Using Cuban technology, they are making some biotech products in India. And recently, they have opened a unit even in Mexico where they make with using the Cuban technology. In a few areas, yes.
And Castro's own relation with India, the Nehru family, and he was very fascinated by the Gurkhas. I remember him speaking about it when the minister met him. You give me 1,000 Gurkhas, he said. I'll teach my neighbor a lesson, how the Gurkhas went and killed the Argentinian soldiers one by one with the kukri. This is a bit of his imagination. And he was asking so many questions about what he called Gurkhas. And then he had this cultivation of moringa in his garden, which came from India. So there was some fascination about, Mrs. Gandhi, of course, the famous incident when he wanted to embrace Mrs. Gandhi on the stage. And there was a lot of criticism about that. And he said, what do I do with my sister except embracing her? So there was as you said, there was a certain romance both ways. Okay, moving over to other aspects of Cuba. I suppose the one which has come closer to Cuba is Venezuela, where you have been an ambassador. And Venezuela has overdone Cuba in a sense because they have become a military dictatorship. They have opposed the Americans. Americans created their own president in the country. So how is Venezuela doing?
I think there is some light at the end of the tunnel.
The two presidents still exist.
So there's only one president. The other one, it was 1.5, and it's 1.1. So like
American president is still around.
Yes, technically, but I mean, he has reached the end of the road.
Okay.
But Venezuela is a very interesting case where Venezuela was one of the richest countries in the world. They were, I think, in 1928, they were the largest exporter of oil in the world. And they made a lot of money, and the Americans came in. And even the culture had become different after oil money. For example, Venezuela is a country where baseball is more popular than football because of the American influence. Mm-hmm. And they not only found oil and sold and made money, but they also took a larger interest in the formation of OPEC. They came and advised the sheikhs in the Middle East how to negotiate with the multinational corporations. So they gave them the secrets, and they became one of the co-founders of OPEC. So they were a respected oil nation with money, oil, and highly educated. And it was not a military dictatorship. In fact, when much of South America was under military dictatorship, people took asylum in Venezuela. It was a great country, but except that between 1950 and 1990, they had two major political parties which alternated one after other, and they colluded and they robbed the country clean. And when the oil price was high, it was okay. But when the oil price went down, they found that they had a lot of debt and there was no money. The money had gone to Switzerland and to Miami. So in 1998, when Chavez was a candidate, he went around. He had this simple question to the audience. Venezuela is a rich country. Why are you poor? They all voted for him. So he came to power, and he was a real revolutionary, and he was an admirer of Castro. And in the beginning, in the first few years, he did wonderful things for the people with his pro-poor policies. And the two major political parties, they were routed in the first election and subsequent elections. And then he changed the constitution, formed a constituent assembly. He won hands down. And it was wonderful, and it's like a mini Cuban revolution. He did, and then he took on
anti-American position evolved. Was he anti-American even when he became president?
Yeah, he imagined himself like Simón Bolívar, the liberator of South America,
right.
And so he took on United States. And the United States, like they did to Modi, they also refused him visa before he became president. He had a grudge. And any case, and he was helping Cuba, so the Americans were unhappy about that. So he took them on. And then he started this anti-imperialist rhetoric, and then connecting with other socialist leftist leaders like Lula and Correa and other people. So he became a force to reckon with. But unfortunately, uh, the opposition drove him to the wall, and he became crazy. Like in 2002, there was a coup. I was there. Uh, the Americans had worked with the local oligarchy. They had stopped the production of oil, distribution, marketing, and they created chaos like they created for Allende in Chile in 1973. And the coup succeeded. They overthrew Chavez, and they put him in jail in a remote island for 2 days. But before that, I have a little incident to mention for your audience. When Chavez had no other go, when he was driven to the wall, he wanted to fight and become a martyr. But it was the Cubans who advised him, no, don't be stupid. So you will come back. Wait. And then, after that, normally during coup times in Latin America, all the leaders, they go to Papal Nuncio, the ambassador of the Vatican, because they are the neutral party and you get asylum there. So Chavez called the Papal Nuncio in Caracas, but the Papal Nuncio was on leave, and the number two was there. He was a Malayali. and so he told Chavez, Senor, if you want asylum, you are welcome to my home. I can take care of you, and but we want to see that everything is resolved peacefully, and we wish you all the best. So the last guy he talked to him, before he was jailed was this Malayali priest who was the number two in the Papal Nuncio in Caracas. Anyways, overthrown, and he was put in the remote island in jail. But then, but the Venezuelan generals who collaborated in this conspiracy and the oligarchy, they also lost the practice of coup. And what they did was, after he was put in jail, so they all fought with each other. I will have the oil ministry, I will have the finance ministry, I will have infrastructure. They were fighting amongst themselves, and they did not give the due share to the generals who collaborated with them. So then the generals thought, if these guys are not giving us anything, why do we go with them? So one of the rebel generals, he brought Chavez back to the presidency in 48 hours, and he took over. Then after that, Chavez initially was a bit repentant and accommodating, compromising. But the opposition wouldn't give him room. They thought they would continue with that further coup attempts. That made him very bitter. So from his agenda of pro-poor, it became anti-rich. He just wanted to punish the rich people, punish the business people, punish those intelligentsia, middle class, who are pro-American, including those people who work in the oil sector. Like in the oil company called the PDVSA, which is the major oil company, government company, he sacked 15,000 people. He said, good hay. And they went to Colombia. and he filled it with the Chavistas. And he wanted to destroy the company. He wanted to destroy business. Unfortunately, and from there was no turning back. And he crippled the economy, imposed controls, foreign exchange, and he made Venezuela as a Cuba. So now if you go to Venezuela, you have the same system. Long queues and shortage of commodities, everything in the black market, currency in the black market. So he has converted Cuba into Venezuela.
And how about the oil industry? How about the oil industry? I heard that the oil has some peculiarities.
The American sanctions prohibit anyone from importing Venezuelan oil. So we were importing till even last year, with some exceptions, the Reliance was importing, but this year we have stopped. So oil is the mainstay. But the Venezuelans, they have rich agricultural potential, They have a lot of minerals, gold, iron ore, copper, and so on. But they neglected everything because they had oil. They thought, no, you would just live happily with oil. So they have become dependent upon oil for everything. Now the industry has been completely suppressed because of the American sanctions. They used to export about 3 million barrels per day, and they were the third or fourth largest supplier to the United States. But now they are not able to export and they can't get the foreign currency. So they are in very, very serious trouble. And then the Americans did this. They created another president called Guaido, which was technically not correct because if they said that the elections were not free and.
Was it Trump who did that?
Pardon me?
Was it Donald Trump who did that?
Yes. Yes. One of those typical foolish things the Americans do in Latin America. So they created, they made this guy as the interim president. But it was not legal. Technically, it was not correct. So it didn't work out. And they tried again coup. They sent mercenaries and it didn't work out. So the government, the Maduro, President Maduro, he doesn't have the charisma or intelligence or the kind of vision of Chavez. So what he has done is he has co-opted the military and the extreme hardcore elements of the militants who are followers of Chavez. And he's basically a nominee of the Cubans. It was the Cubans who advised Chavez to make him as the president because this guy was educated in Cuba, and he is not independent. He will follow what the Cubans say. So that is the reason he was chosen. And no one knows how it was chosen because Chavez was in a coma in the hospital in Cuba when they announced that Maduro would become president. Maduro is a very decent guy, very normal person, but he's a prisoner of circumstance. He's not an authoritarian dictator on his own. He doesn't do anything. It is the collective leadership. And now the other president chosen by the United States, that Guaido, he's lost all credibility with corruption. Because what they did was the Venezuelan money was lying in the banks of the United States, and there were a lot of Venezuelan assets. So some smart American lawyers, they thought they could help themselves using this figurehead of Guaido as the president, hundreds of millions of dollars. So they took the money and they froze the money. The American government froze the money, and then they said, okay, this can be used by Guaido for his government. So they swindled the Venezuelan money in the American banks. So now that has also come to a halt now. So now the Mexicans are mediating between the Maduro and Guaido to see some kind of compromise. Because Guaido has also realized that no, he can't, because he's not a great leader and there are more senior leaders than him. He was chosen, just like Maduro was chosen by Cuba, and Guaido was chosen by Americans because they thought he was the only guy who non-independent. He would do whatever we say. So that has come to a halt now. So there would be some kind of talks, and they would reach some compromise, and that is the only way. Thereafter, if they remove the sanctions, then they would be able to sell oil, and the Venezuelan people would have some money to buy, and they would come out of this misery.
But is it true that the Venezuelan oil has some problem? It has too much sulfur content or something, which not suit our refineries. Is that so?
No, sir. You see, our oil companies, the government companies, they took the easy way out. They set up refineries just to suit the Gulf crude, which was not a correct way of doing. When Ambani set up the Jamnagar refinery, that refinery could take the crude from any part of the world. So that way they played one against the other. They came to Venezuela when I was there in 2000. and wanted to buy oil. And Chavez was very happy because he was over dependent upon the Americans. So he thought, here there is a big market, and so let us diversify. So it was a win-win for both. So, and they gave discounts to him. So he took the discount and the Reliance and showed it to the Kuwaitis and the Saudi Arabians. You see, I'm getting this discount from Venezuela.
That's the price
They're
is
going to
there.
pay. Smart. So now the Reliance refinery as well as the SR refinery, that's also in the same model, can process any crude. So now there is no problem.
It's not a doubt.
Hmm.
Okay, let us turn to Brazil, which is the third interesting country. And Brazil was a very normal country, and I remember how well we worked with them in various areas, particularly disarmament, and so many. And it was always a very reliable country, skillful diplomats. But what happened? Where is this? Where does this Bolsonaro come from, and how has he ruined that country?
They call him as Captain Corona.
That is now. Earlier he was second. He was second Trump. He himself called himself Trump number two.
Well, Trump at least did some business, and he was in the TV, and he was an inspiration for a few people. But this guy is from the gutter. This guy, he was a disgrace even for the army. He was in the army. He was a captain. He tried something funny there. He was thrown out of that. And this guy was in the fringe. And what happened was the Dilma Rousseff government, it got caught in this scandal of corruption, what's called a car wash scandal, where millions of dollars were stolen by executives of the oil company, plus the politicians across the spectrum. Not only the Workers' Party, all the parties had taken share. But Bolsonaro didn't get anything because he was too far low in the rank. And that scandal was blown up. And there were disproportionately large agitations and so on. Same like what happened in Venezuela and same like what happened during Allende's time. There are some dark forces because Lula made the mistake of taking on United States for regional leadership. And not he united South America with something called UNASUR, Union of South American Countries, with defense as one of the components. Then he united the whole of Latin America, the 19 countries, in something called CELAC, the Latin American Community. And so with the collective strength, the Latin America became assertive, and Lula was the natural leader of this united Latin America. So this alarmed the Americans, and they came out with their own scheme. They came out with something called Free Trade Area of the Americas, started by Clinton. And they said, from Argentina to Canada, we would be one single market. And it was a mirage, but the Americans can sell anything. So they tried to fool the Latin Americans, saying that we would be one large market. So they started negotiations, and it was going on. But Chavez and Lula saw that it was a ruse. It was just a trick, because they had put two conditions, the Americans. One was that when the FTAA came into being, all the regional subgroups of Latin America should be dissolved, like Mercosur, Andean Community, Central American, SICA. They should all be dissolved. And number two, one should not wait for all the issues to be sorted out in the trade negotiations, but as and when there is any progress, they should be implemented, what you call as the early harvest scheme. So that means you open up your markets for our products, for your agriculture products that we'll see later. And for the first time in the history of 400 years history of Latin America, the Latin Americans put their foot down and said no. They said nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
The
FTA or no FTA, we will have our regional groups. And the leadership of this was done by Lula and Chavez. I remember Bush went to Mar del Plata as a resort in Argentina for what they call the Summit of the Americas for the final negotiations. And Chavez went to Buenos Aires and took a train full of agitators shouting slogans against Bush. And so was Lula. And they had Krishna, who was also a fellow leftist. And their United States was completely isolated. And Bush was walking alone in the beach. And even his friends from Colombia and Mexico, because of all the noise, they didn't want to be near him. So they killed the FTA. So that was a great victory. But Lula didn't stop with that. He offered to mediate between Iran and United States. That was beyond that. And then when the financial crisis happened, it said, what crisis? It's the crisis of the blue-eyed, blonde-haired guys from Wall Street. Because in 2010, Latin America as a whole had the highest growth rate of 6%. And Brazil almost got about 10% growth. The Brazilian oil company called Petrobras, in 2010, they issued an IPO, which was the world's largest IPO at the time of $70 billion. It's all after the crisis. So Lula became too big. And when there was a coup in Honduras in 2009, Honduras is in the Mexican-American sphere, in the Central America. But Lula interfered. When the president of Honduras, called Manuel Zelaya, was thrown out, Lula managed to smuggle him back into Honduras and gave him asylum in the Brazilian embassy. And from the Brazilian embassy, he started with his microphone and calling on his fellow Hondurans. And so that was a face-to-face confrontation between United States and Lula. So the Americans wanted to punish Lula and set an example for the others. And that's how Dilma Rousseff was overthrown and Bolsonaro came to power.
But Bolsonaro is what? Is he a leftist anyway?
He doesn't have the intelligence to understand what is left or right. What he knows is the military, and he has been calling on his supporters in front of the presidential palace. They said, we want dictatorship back. We don't want Supreme Court. I don't want Congress. The other day, last week, when they had a congressional debate, because this guy says the election is a fraud. He says, like Trump, he says the electronic voting is fraud, although he was elected by that last time. Now he says, no, we should have only paper ballots, otherwise we will not have election. And so he put pressure. So the Congress was debating. At that time, he had a military parade in front of the palace to intimidate the Congress. Of course, they were not intimidated. They said no to that. He is a shame on Brazil. It's a shame for democracy. And he was ashamed
and the
for
environment. He burnt down all the forests, and on Corona, he took the line of
yes. And he told people, Brazilian, that if you take this vaccine, you will become crocodiles.
No, that's what I'm saying. But how has he survived?
It was an accident because the United States and the not local oligarchies, it's basically some dark forces. They did it's not a military coup. Dilma Rousseff was impeached by the Congress for some fudging of the budget, which is all the governments all over the world do all the time. Some readjustment of the budget figures from one segment to other. On the technical ground, they overthrew her, and that led to a lot of confusion, and the confusion, this guy got elected. But now, in the next elections are due into 2022, and Lula is going to come back. He's already leading in the opinion polls by double digits.
So then the situation will be reversed. You think?
Yes.
And your own hometown, Buenos Aires, Argentina, are they doing well?
No. Again, this is yet another tragic story. Argentina was also one of the richest countries in the world in the 1900s. They were among the top 10 richest countries.
No, it was like Europe. I've been to Buenos Aires. It was not come from any Europe, glamorous.
But the Argentines have this great talent to create poverty out of prosperity.
Like the Mexicans.
So they have series of problems one after that. Basically, they spend more than they earn and get into debt, and and then they have inflation, and it's. They came out in 2003. They had the world's largest debt of $90 billion. The Argentine president at the time, Krishna, said, "No, I can't pay it. I'll pay 30 cents to a dollar. Take it or leave it." And he managed it. It was going on well. But when the last time, when the right came to power, Macri, he again went back to the IMF and he took a loan of about $50 billion. Now, again, they have gone into debt and they are not able to pay, and they are going to default. That's a perennial, eternal curse on Argentina. They are not at all doing well.
But there is also emergence of leftists. Because you are saying that the re-emergence of the left in Latin America. Argentina will be included in that?
Let me explain why I say re-emergence. So, the Latin Americans, like the rest of the world, they got fascinated by what Marx said, and especially after the success of the Russian Revolution. In fact, Trotsky took asylum in Mexico. He was given asylum there. And the Mexican Communist Party was formed in 1919. And one of the co-founders is M.N. Roy, who later came back to India and founded Indian Communist Party. So there was this general, because Latin America is a region of large disparity in income and wealth. So this idea of achieving socio-economic equality, it caught the imagination of the intellectuals, the writers, and some of the political leaders. So they were inspired, and the left was growing in strength sporadically. And then later, when the Cuban Revolution succeeded, that really it spread like wildfire. And the Cubans, punching above their weight, they supported lefties, gave training to people across Latin America. And there's a lot of intellectuals, writers, professors, students. They all caught on to these leftist ideals, communism, Marxism, and some of them believed in armed revolution. But then came the Cold War and the American war on communism. So the Americans overthrew the leftist governments, supported the military dictatorship, and crushed the jailed, tortured, and killed and exiled leftists across the region. The first time it was done was in 1954 in Guatemala. In Guatemala, the largest landowner was United Fruit Company. Yeah. And their profit was double the government income of the Guatemalan government.
This is the banana.
Actually, it applied to Honduras, but United Fruit Company had operations in the region. And the Guatemalan government requested the United Fruit Company to spare the land which they were not using it. But they wouldn't, because one of the shareholders was Alan Foster Dulles, the Dulles brothers. One was CIA director, the other one was Secretary of State. So they wouldn't. So they overthrew this government in 1954, the leftist government of Urbans. And one of the guys who was caught in the crossfire was Che Guevara. He was there. And that is where he was inspired with his anti-imperialism. And
He's still a hero in Kerala.
Yes.
Che Guevara's pictures together with Castro's and so on.
So in
People don't know what he did, but Che Guevara is an icon here.
I would say Che Guevara is much more of an idealist icon even than Fidel Castro.
Right.
Because Fidel Castro became a smart politician, and he did a lot of things which are not admired. But Che Guevara, an Argentine, he went and fought for his ideals in Cuba, in Angola, in Bolivia, and he sacrificed his life willingly, knowingly. And he didn't want anything for himself. He didn't want power. He didn't want money. He didn't want any comfort. He was a fighter, a true revolutionary all the way. So that is why I would put him at a higher pedestal than even Fidel Castro.
So he never came to power, even though Castro rode on his reputation.
They made him as the president of the central bank, and they made him as the minister of industries, which he messed up all of them because he was idealistic. So the American government overthrew Urbans, and then they tried to overthrow Cuba many times. And then when Sandinistas came to power in 1979 in Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, another revolutionary, right, they overthrew the Somoza dictatorship, and they were in power 79 to 89. But President Reagan started this Contra war with the mercenaries from Central America, and they bled Nicaragua dry. They caused so much of death and destruction.
We had a meeting of the non-aligned movement in Nicaragua.
Yes. Yes. So with this, the war on communism and Cold War, it completely suppressed these leftists. A lot of people lost their lives and livelihood and became exiles. Now, in the 21st century, some of these people who were tortured, jailed, and exiled, they have become presidents. Dilma Rousseff was tortured by the hero of Bolsonaro, the hero whom Bolsonaro admires.
No, but when you say reemergence of the left, how much percentage of Latin America is under influence of the left now?
I'm coming to that, sir. So you have the Dilma Rousseff, you have Michelle Bachelet, who is president of Chile, yes, and
she's the Human Rights Commission.
Yes, and you have Jose Mujica, who is ex-president of Uruguay. He was put in jail for 14 years, of which 1 year they put him in a well, a dry well inside. And Mujica says that is when he learned to speak to frogs, because that was his only company. And he was called by economists as the world's poorest president. He drove his Volkswagen Beetle, and he lived in a house, in his own farmhouse, where he was growing.
We have seen pictures of his life.
Yes. So that's how the left, which was crushed during the Cold War, now it is re-emerging with those martyrs, with those people who sacrifice.
But in a small way. It's not overwhelming or overpowering. This is just the growth of leftist sentiments rather than grabbing power, isn't it?
Sir, in the first decade of this century, from 2000 to 2010-12, most of Latin America was under a leftist presidents, except for Mexico and Colombia. And now even Mexico, for the first time in the history of Mexico, they have elected a leftist, a radical leftist, Lopez Obrador as president. The only country which stands out is Colombia. But the reason is left has been given a bad name by FARC. FARC, which started as a movement for land reforms and so on, they became a terrorist organization, and they were into extortion and drugs and so on. So the left got discredited. But now, even in Colombia, you have the mayor of Bogota is a leftist, and they have a lot of new leaders who are emerging. But by and large, the overwhelming the power was in the hands of leftists with Lula and so on. But right now, the icons are, I would classify the leftists in three categories. One is the pink pragmatists, radical reds, and black sheep socialists. The pink pragmatists are are like Lula and.
You don't mean communism. You mean a kind of glorified Stalinism, Marxism, that kind of approach, right?
It's a spectrum.
Right.
Like Lula, I would say, is the leader of this pink pragmatists. They call that first decade as the pink tide. Now, Lula had this Bolsa Familia program, brought about 30 million people out of poverty line, and did a lot of things for the poor people. Coming from a poor family, he was a late worker, he was not educated well. But he realized that to distribute wealth, you have to create wealth. And the government alone cannot create wealth. You have to give space for the private sector to create wealth and employment. So he developed his pragmatic indigenous model, which I call as Lulaism, or Brasilia consensus, which is the opposite of Washington consensus of neoliberalism.
All that has been destroyed by Bolsonaro for the time being. Lula comes back.
But it set a model and it set the standard. What Lula did was he gave freedom for the business to flourish. In fact, even after he retired as president, he traveled to India with business companies to promote Brazilian business in India and in other countries. So the companies were very happy. They were doing very well. So he wanted the companies to flourish and create jobs and wealth. And that meant more tax, more income for the government, which they distributed to the poor people. So that was the most pragmatic way. It was a judicial combination and mixture of pro-poor and business-friendly policies. It was something like 60-40. So what happened was, but the opposite was Chavez. Chavez said, let us destroy these businessmen and industrialists. He went to the extreme. So in the second decade, when leftists stood for elections, the opponents will call them, this guy is going to be the Chavez of Ecuador, Chavez of Peru. But then they would say that, no, I will be the Lula of Ecuador, Lula of Uruguay, Lula of Paraguay.
All right.
So this became competing models. And of course, the best model was Lulaism. And that is the way the future of left is going to be. It is going to be pragmatic, center, accommodating private sector, and distributing money to the poor people. So
the Americans will not be over concerned about that.
Well,
private sector
now it's no longer the open war on communism; it's a clandestine war on socialism.
As long as the private sector thrives,
they will keep doing that.
So
I was telling you the pink pragmatists like Jose Mujica and Evo Morales and
even Maduro. Even Maduro will come into that.
And the radical leftists, they wanted to spread the revolution. They were very strong with the anti-imperialist rhetoric. Chavez was the leader, and Correa, who was the ex-president of Ecuador, and to some extent even Bolivian Evo Morales, they were the radicals. And they were not tolerant of the opposition. Whereas Lula, being a trade unionist, he always believed in negotiations. He even negotiated with the whole Congress of Brazil. He bribed every congressman to get his bills passed. And when the scandal erupted, he managed that also. But Dilma Rousseff didn't have the talent to negotiate.
So what I hear from you, the whole situation is in still a flux, right? Latin America, there is no Latin American policy or Latin American system to talk about.
Yes, I'm coming to that, sir. And the third category is the black sheep. You have black sheep. There are three countries. One, Cuba, which is undemocratic, and Venezuela, which is a joke on democracy and socialism. Although Chavez wanted to create a 21st century socialism, but no one knows what it is. And Sandinista revolution, Nicaragua. Now, it has become a shame on liberation and revolution. This guy, Daniel Ortega, who overthrew the dictatorship of the Somoza dynasty, now he has formed his own dynasty. He and his wife and his sons, they are ruling. And so, according to the Nicaraguan constitution, you can have only 2 terms. He changed the constitution. He did all kinds of fraud. Now he is going to stand for the 4th term. And he has put all the opponents in jail and suppressed the press. And they are going to have elections in October. And he is going to be elected. It has become a shame. So these 3 is what the Americans call it the axis of evil. Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. These are the exceptions. Now, the rest of Latin America has to have some left because historically, if you see, the region was colonized by the Spanish and Portuguese, and they extracted everything they could. And these colonies were used to make their parent countries rich. So they say the difference between North America and South America, United States and Latin America is this. In Latin America, in North America, it was the know-how which was important. But in Latin America, it is the know-who. And in United States, the business model was customer is the king. But in Latin America, king was the customer. So he said, you do anything you do. You do mining or you do trading or you do agriculture, give 20% to the throne. So that is how the corruption was institutionalized from the beginning. And initially, the continent was used for Spain and Portugal. Then in the 1820s, when they became independent, the people who came to power are the white people, the descendants of the rulers who were governors and generals. When they came, they were ruling the countries for themselves. They didn't care for the indigenous people. They didn't care for the black people. They didn't care for the mixed population. And that's how it was. Like, for example, Bolivia, which has 60% population, natives, Indians, they practiced a kind of apartheid. The Bolivian Indians were not allowed near the palace, near the Chamber of Commerce, nothing. They were kept out of this for 400 years. For the first time in 2006, Evo Morales got elected. This was a paradigm shift where the Indians came to rule themselves. and it was an inspiration for the over 40 million native Indians across Latin America, from Mexico to Chile. And in fact, actually, this re-emergence, it is not only of academic or political interest for the region, but even for the world. It has some lessons. For example, one of the debates in the world is this neoliberalism versus the inclusive development.
Sure.
Now, Chile is the best example of what is going on. Chile has a billionaire president, Sebastián Piñera, whose net worth is over $2 billion. Chile was the first country which was the laboratory for neoliberalism. When Pinochet came to power, he brought Milton Friedman and his disciples, called the Chicago Boys. They privatized everything. They privatized water, they privatized healthcare, education. So only the white people, rich people could afford education, the poor people couldn't. So although Chile was doing the numbers, GDP growth was doing very well, the growth was only for the rich people and the business people. Everything was expensive for the poor people. But it carried on with the Pinochet had put this neoliberalism in the constitution of privatization and everything. Now, in 2019, there were agitations when the metro fare was increased by 30 pesos. It's a small amount. And they broke metro stations. There were big fight against the police, and a few students got killed. But and the government started negotiating with them. The agitators didn't want just the removal of the 30 pesos. They wanted the removal of the constitution, which suppressed using neoliberalism for the last 30 years. So the government had no other way but to agree to the demand of the agitators, the protesters, for a new constitution. In May this year, they had an election for a new constituent assembly, in which the rightists got only 37 seats in the 155 strong constituent assembly. So it is completely dominated by leftists. Most of them are independents, and some are communists and Marxists and leftists and socialists. Now, this is a unique experiment. This is the first time in the history of the world when a new constitution is being framed by true representatives of the people, not by the oligarchy or by generals or the people in power, by the real representatives of people. And here, out of the 155, it is 50-50 women and men, gender parity. Of course, there's only one more, 77 women and 78 men. First time in the history of the world. 77 women with 78 men framing a constitution.
Okay, we have to conclude that. We have to conclude. We are running out of time.
Oh, sorry. Let me finish this one. And guess who is the president of this Constituent Assembly? Is an indigenous Mapuche Indian woman called Long Kong, Elisa Long Kong. It is extraordinary because the Pinochet constitution did not recognize the indigenous people. They took away their lands. In fact, this Long Kong's father was jailed, arrested, and killed by the Pinochet dictatorship. And now she, who is a language professor of a Mapuche language, she has become the president of this assembly. And in this 55 members assembly, 17 seats have been reserved for the indigenous people. This is inclusive development. So Chile, which was the first where neoliberalism was implanted, now sees the burial of this neoliberalism now. This is extraordinary. This is more than Chile. This is more than the leftist in America.
Right. No, so that this trend will probably spread to other Latin American countries and will be a different kind of a lifestyle and politics in Latin America, you think?
So, as I said, historically, there's been large poverty, inequality. Latin America has the highest disparity in income among the continents. So, as long as it is there, uh, uh, people in these real democracies will vote for those who have an agenda for the people, those who have pro-poor policies. That is inevitable. That is why even the rightist governments, like in Colombia, they also have, like Bolsa Familia, they have these pro-poor conditional cash transfer policies. So this is the future of Latin America, where either left will be in power or the leftist ideals and policies will be incorporated in the government policies. And it would be, but their model is centrist, balanced, pro poor, and business friendly policies.
Not necessarily anti-American.
Uh, that will be there as long as the United States continues to interfere and try to stop this.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much, Vish, for this delightful conversation, and you have given us so much information. Because as you know, Latin America is not very much in the discourse of today. But this was most interesting, and let's see how these things go. Thank you very much.
I just want to finally say one thing, sir, for your audience, for many of whom will be from Kerala. There's a similarity between Kerala and Latin America, where in terms of football and literature and Marxism. I know in Kerala, football is very popular. They have Messi and Maradona. And secondly, the Gabriel Garcia Marquez at one time was the number one bestseller.
He's a Malayali writer.
In fact, some Malayali writers claim that actually a Kerala writer, he was the precursor of magical realism before Gabriel Garcia.
I know that.
Both Kerala and Latin America had this experience. Nambudiri Bath government in 1959 was overthrown. Of course, very subtly, not in a coup. But from that, communists have re-emerged, just as they did in Latin America. Thank you, sir.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you. And for giving us so much information on Latin America. Thank you very much. Hope to see you soon.